We're here in the early part of Luke, which tells about lots of Jesus' visits to synagogues. In the first Luke 4 and 5, we heard the story of Jesus going to the synagogue first in Nazareth, where he grew up, where it emphasized his gracious words, and then going to the synagogue in Capernaum, where a lot of his ministry happened, and there it emphasized his authoritative teaching. And as these stories are going on, we're seeing those things continue, where Jesus has much grace that he's giving people, but he's also the one with the authority to give that grace out. And then we see that Jesus is going to synagogues, but the interesting part is that Jesus keeps retreating to be alone to pray. He's going to church to tell other people about himself, but he's getting alone to be with God. He's doing this for others, not necessarily for himself. And we've already seen that the Pharisees are starting to have conflict with Jesus. And one of the things that they're accusing him of is not being serious and rigorous enough in his religion. They're accusing his disciples of not fasting correctly. We're going to have a conflict over what they do on a Sabbath today. But I want you to see that Jesus isn't showing off, but privately, Jesus is doing way more serious alone time with God than they know about. And it's none of their business. But Luke's telling us Jesus does have this connection to God. Okay? Now, in Luke 6, it's going to discuss what is lawful versus unlawful. And it's going to use this as a way of showing us two things about Jesus: his authority and his grace again. Right? The law is who's in charge is the law, but then will the one who is in charge use the law to clobber us with it, or is he going to be nice and forgiving through that? That's what we're seeing here. So Luke chapter 6, starting at verse 1, says, "One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, 'Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?' And Jesus answered, 'Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions.' And then Jesus said to them, 'The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.'" You see what the question is about here? What is unlawful and what is lawful? And what they're saying is unlawful is that the disciples are picking grain as they walk through the field, rubbing it together in their hands, and eating it. And in the Old Testament law, you notice they're not complaining that they're stealing. Because walking through someone else's field and eating what's there while you're walking through it is explicitly allowed in the Old Testament. You're allowed to eat on your way through someone's field. You can't chop it down and take it with you, but that was just the rule. If you walked through someone's orchard, you could eat their apples. If you walked through their grain field, you could eat their grain. That was just the way that it worked. But then what they are saying is they're saying this breaks the rule about working on the Sabbath, and specifically one of the things that the Old Testament says not to do on the Sabbath is to harvest your fields. And so they're saying, you guys are harvesting grain on the Sabbath, you're working. Now, it's interesting that Jesus didn't say this. Come on, guys, really? Harvesting? We're not harvesting. We're eating a snack on our way to church. Like we're not working here. We're just eating a little something on our way to church. Instead, Jesus takes this opportunity to compare himself to David and say, I can do things that are only lawful for the priests and for David because I am the Son of Man, the Lord of the Sabbath. You see what Jesus did there? That's really interesting. Again, Jesus could have focused on the small part, and there's some interesting things about the Sabbath that he could have focused on. The Sabbath is supposed to be a day of celebration, and when you read the two ways that the Ten Commandments are written in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, they each give an additional reason for celebrating the Sabbath, for taking the day off and focusing on God during that day. In Exodus 20, it says, God's the one who created the whole world. That's why you should remember that by taking the day off. And in Deuteronomy 5, it says, you used to be slaves in Egypt, and now you're free, and God's the one who freed you, and that's why you should take the day off to celebrate him. And the Sabbath is an interesting way also that it's a way of intentionally leaving some work undone. You ever think about that? We try to help other people. But part of what's meaningful about what you have is that you've worked for it. And the Sabbath day is a day of intentionally leaving some of your work undone. And you know what? The same rules that led to the ability to glean also are involved in leaving work undone for someone else to do. Can you imagine if you could leave your shift at your job, whatever job you have, 1 hour early and leave that extra hour of work undone, and that someone who needed it could just come in and do that 1 hour of work and take the benefit and go home? Our jobs are more complicated. It doesn't work like farming with that. But they actually had rules that they were not supposed to pick every last bit of the grain. They were only supposed to go through the field once and leave what was left for people who needed it to go get it. So that rather than just giving people grain, they were giving people the opportunity to pick the grain themselves and maybe even learn the know-how of how to pick grain, thresh grain. They're probably more likely to be able to get a job working in the fields later on. Okay? Now, again, it's interesting that Jesus didn't go into all of these things about the Sabbath that he could have. The Sabbath is a good gift from God, and gleaning is a good gift from God. This is all good. Instead, Jesus just skips to, I can do things that are only lawful for the priests and for David, because I'm the Son of Man, the Lord of the Sabbath. Okay, so the story he's talking about is from 1 Samuel. And David is the anointed king of Israel. He's the rightful king even before he's king. And the word for the anointed one in Greek is Christ. The word for the anointed one in Hebrew is Messiah, Mashiach. Jesus is in this role that David is. From the time he's baptized, Jesus is the anointed one, the rightful king of Israel even before he's king. And David was in this period of his life when he's on the run from Saul, and he's leading his men, and they arrive to where the tabernacle is set up, and they're hungry. And there's no food to give them except for the bread that is the show bread, the bread of the presence that they put in the temple. They would bake 12 loaves, one for each tribe of Israel, and they would put it in the holy place, and it was the picture of their presence being there with God. And only the priests were allowed to eat that bread. But that was the only bread they had, and David took it, and he didn't just eat it himself, he used it to feed his men. And when you read that story, our family's just finished reading through 1st and 2nd Samuel, and you see a lot of things David did, and you went, ooh, was that the right thing to do? And Jesus is saying, in this case, David didn't get in trouble for that. And I am in the same position as David. In fact, I'm in a higher position than David. I am the rightful Christ. I am the rightful king of Israel. And if I want the guys who are with me to eat on their way to church, I could walk right into the temple and take the bread from there and feed it to them. It's a much lesser thing for them to just eat grain on their way to church. You see how Jesus is using this to focus on who he is rather than just what the rules are. Now, here's the other interesting thing. When Jesus was being tempted in the desert, the devil said, turn these rocks into bread. And Jesus was in the middle of a rigorous fast. Remember, the Pharisees think that Jesus and his disciples are not serious enough. But Jesus was in the middle of that, and Jesus was unwilling to do a miracle to feed himself. But he's totally willing to defend feeding his disciples. See, this is part of Jesus, is using his authority not to feed himself, but to feed us, to give to them. And that's what Jesus uses here, is to show his authority. Jesus says he's the Son of Man. And when we hear Son of Man, we hear human. Right? If you're the son of a human, you're also human, right? That's the way it works. But this phrase, the Son of Man, is coming from Daniel 7. In Daniel's vision, the Son of Man is the one who comes, the human, who comes into God's presence, is brought up, sat down on a throne next to him, is the one who judges at the final judgment and who is worshiped by all nations. Jesus is saying, I'm that one, and then Jesus says he is the Lord of the Sabbath. I looked up how many times the Sabbath is described in the Old Testament as a Sabbath to the Lord your God. If Jesus is saying, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath, and the Sabbath is the day to honor the Lord your God, what is Jesus claiming to be in addition to the Son of Man? He's claiming to be God by saying that. That's the height of his authority, and he's using his authority to feed his disciples who are around him. But that's not the only thing that happened on the Sabbath. On another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue, and he was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. So they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking, and he said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up, stand in front of everyone." So he got up and he stood there. And Jesus said to them, "I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or destroy it?" He looked around at them all and then said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and his hand was completely restored. But they were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. You see how the question is still about what is lawful versus what is unlawful in this story? And you know what? They're actually looking for a reason to accuse Jesus. They're watching to see if is he going to do something they're get in trouble for. This reminds me of the story of Daniel, where they want to get rid of Daniel as a leader, and so they start looking for a crime that he's committing in order to get him in trouble. And they're doing the same thing with Jesus. They don't like Jesus. They want him not to be in power, and so they're looking for something. And they think they've created a dilemma, a dilemma. We were talking about dilemmas this week. Do you know what do you hear the words in there? Di means two. We've got two things here that are both bad options, right? What are the two bad options they think they've got Jesus on? He's either going to leave this man unhealed, then he's mean for not healing the man, or he's going to heal him on the Sabbath, which breaks the Sabbath. There's two ways. No matter what he does here, we've got him. See, he's in this position now. And Jesus tells the man to stand up and stretch out his hand. Is there anything wrong with standing or stretching out your hand on the Sabbath? Is there any way they could construe that into working? See, Jesus is going to heal other people that later on they're going to say, "Oh, you healed a man who couldn't walk, and then you had him pick up his mat, and then he walked with it, and that's work." This one, there's no example of something that could be misconstrued as work. He literally has the man stand up and stretch out his hand. Now, I think it's interesting that in the previous story, they were complaining that the disciples were using their hands on the Sabbath to pick grain and to clean it. And now there's a man who can't use his hand on the Sabbath or any other day. I think it's interesting that these two stories go hand in hand. And I think that the point is sometimes we get so concerned about what we're not doing with our hands, not committing sins, that we forget that our hands are designed to do good things with. Right? You could spend your whole life avoiding ever doing anything bad with your hands and never do anything good with your hands. And in the second story, Jesus is helping a man who can't do anything good or bad with his hands to be healed so that he can use his hands for God. It's interesting that in the other Gospels, some additional things get added. In Matthew, Jesus tells the story of having a sheep that gets himself into trouble on the Sabbath and said, you'd be willing to save a sheep. How much more would you be willing to save a man? In Mark, it says that Jesus got angry that they didn't want him to heal this man. And here in Luke, he just says that they're the ones who are mad at him. Do you see the difference? Do you see that it's right to be frustrated? If people don't want you to do what's good, that's a right thing to be frustrated about. Don't sin in your frustration, but that's the right thing to go, no, I do want to do what's right. And instead, they're mad at Jesus. This word furious means filled with madness, or filled with rage, or filled with fury. This is literally the word we get annoyance from. They were filled with annoyance at Jesus. Like they were in Luke 4. Luke has told us multiple stories now, and the times when they get maddest at Jesus is when he is being the most gracious to people that they don't want him to be gracious to. Back at the synagogue in Luke 4, he said, I'm going to tell the Gentiles about this. And they're like, no, don't give grace to them. And then he calls Matthew, who's a tax collector, and he's giving a party for sinners, and they say, don't show grace to him. And now Jesus is using his power from God to heal someone on the Sabbath, so that literally they're mad that someone stood up and lifted their hand. There's no way to stretch that into being working. Now, Jesus says, which one is lawful? To save life or to destroy it? Which one is the legal thing to do? And the Pharisees, looking at Jesus, do you notice what they do? Luke only tells us they got together to discuss what they might do to Jesus. Mark's a little bit clearer than this euphemism. Mark says they discussed how they might kill Jesus. That's what they wanted to do to him. So here's the question. Is it lawful to heal someone who has a shriveled hand on the Sabbath, or to have a business meeting where you plan a murder on the Sabbath? Which one? See, the Pharisees are willing to have the business meeting to plot a murder on the Sabbath when they aren't happy for Jesus to heal someone on the Sabbath. And then, do you notice Jesus' authority here? Luke tells us for the second time that he knows what they're thinking. Now, these guys were not doing very much to hide what they were thinking, I imagine, at this point. We probably could have guessed what they were thinking, but Jesus knew exactly what they were thinking in this situation. And Jesus is showing not only his authority, but his grace here. He says he wants to save life instead of destroy it. And do you know what? This is the first time Luke has used the word save through the book. The word for save or heal is the same word oftentimes. This word is for saving life. But the next several times he's going to use it, he's going to say, your faith has saved you. He's going to say, believe in order to be saved. We're in the story of the spreading of the seeds. You see, we put our faith in Jesus to be saved. The way that he saves our life is more than just our physical life. Luke is already telling us that we trust in Jesus, we believe in Jesus, we put our faith in Jesus in order for him to save our lives eternally. And Jesus is showing, by fixing this man's hand, that he can fix all of us, everything that's wrong with us, permanently, by faith in Jesus. That's the claim he's making. And then this section in Luke ends with one more story, and that's the story of Jesus calling apostles. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray, and he spent praying to God. He spent the night praying to God, and when morning came, he called his disciples to him, and he chose 12 of them, whom he designated apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon who was called the Zealot, Judas son of James, and Judas Iscariot who became a traitor. He doesn't specifically mention the law here, but do you remember the same conflict that they're having where they think Jesus isn't a rigorous enough faster prayer? And here is Jesus going out on the mountainside in the middle of the night to pray. Jesus is more serious about his relationship with God than they are, but he's not showing off about it. And this sounds a lot like Moses being on a mountainside too. That's where Moses spent time with God. This is another picture of Jesus' authority that they would have recognized. Oh, he's kind of being like Moses there. And you know, another thing that Moses did was to call additional people to help him. And Jesus is now calling people to be in positions of authority around him. And it says that he took from his disciples and he called them apostles. Do you know what the difference between those two words are? The word disciple means student, learner. And it's right for us to be students and learners from Jesus. But then Jesus is adding something on. He's making them into apostles, sent ones, messengers, missionaries, ambassadors. He's saying, you guys go share with everyone the grace and authority I've been sharing. You guys go share it. And Luke's going to send them on a missions trip in Luke chapter 9. He's going to send out 12 of them. And then in Luke 10, he's going to send 72 of them. So there are 12 capital A apostles. But Jesus is sending lots of people to represent him, like lowercase a apostles, like missionaries, messengers. And it's right for us to think about these two parts of the way we're following Jesus. We're following him as disciples who are learning from him, and we should never stop doing that. But Jesus is also treating us as apostles, messengers, ambassadors to teach other people what Jesus has taught us. And we have both of those positions. Now, these 12 guys contain some interesting things about these guys. First of all, in all of the Gospels, the focus is not these 12 guys. Some of these guys, we basically hear their name on the list and we never hear any other stories about them. Because it's not about them, it's about Jesus. They're representing Jesus. Some of these guys we hear lots of stories about. What we do hear about them are some interesting things. There was 3 repeated names on the list. Do you notice? Who are your disciples? Simon, Simon, Judas, Judas, James, and James. And the other 6 guys who have unique names. Then, a lot of them have 2 names. That makes sense when you got 2 Simons. You got to call one of them Peter and the other one the Zealot. You got to call the Jameses John's brother and the other James. Judas is on one of the lists as Thaddeus. Maybe he wanted to change his name because he didn't want to be known as the same name as Judas who betrayed Jesus. But the Judas who betrayed Jesus is called Iscariot, meaning from Kirioth, which was a place in Judah. So we get some information about them. We kind of hear their nickname. We hear their job about some of them. We hear their family about some of them. In fact, most of them we have some details. Simon Peter, we got more details about him than anyone else. His brother's there with him, Andrew. Andrew's one of the guys who doesn't get a nickname, but at least his name means manly. If you got to have only one name, manly is a good name to keep, right? We know that they lived in Capernaum, Bethsaida. They're up from Galilee. Then those 2 guys are brothers, but then James and John are brothers. And we know James and John's dad's name is Zebedee. Peter's dad gets listed as either John or Jonah, which tells us something about John. It's another name for Jonah from the Old Testament. Probably you think of Jonathan and David also. There's another guy named Johanan. It was a name. It was a Hebrew name. By the way, most of their names, they have a Greek version of their name and a Hebrew version of their name. Thomas in Hebrew means the twin. And John tells us he's Thomas, called Didymus, the twin. So he was like the twin in Hebrew or the twin in Greek. And so they're living in a bilingual place where they've got these 2 names. Okay, who did I stop with? Peter and John. Peter and John get a nickname. I don't know why Peter, every time he's mentioned, he gets to be the rock. That's what Peter means. Jesus gave them a nickname, the Sons of Thunder. I hear you guys stomp into the house sometimes, and you go, oh, okay, the Sons of Thunder are here. That's it. But they don't get called that every time they're around. But they're fishermen. And you know what? Peter and Andrew, James, and John are fishermen, but you know what? After Jesus rises from the dead, Thomas and Nathaniel are out fishing with them on the boat in that story. You know what that probably means? Thomas and Nathaniel were probably fishermen too. Philip is a name that was from the Herod family. Seems like it was like a common baby name at the time. It was, you're going to be a big guy like that. Philip has no nickname. Bartholomew is Bar, son of Ptolemaio, or Bartholomew. That's his family name. He's also the one on the lists. It looks like his other name was Nathaniel or Nethanel, which was an Old Testament name. Then Matthew is called Levi. Do you hear that again? Levi is one of the children of Israel. By the way, Simon is Simeon. It's also one of the 12 tribes of Israel. He's got an Israelite name. And then the interesting thing is Matthew is the son of Alphaeus, but then James is also the son of Alphaeus. Maybe they were brothers, or maybe there was two Alphaeuses. It's interesting that they don't go together on the list. The other brothers come in pairs. It's possible that Matthew and James were brothers also. Then we've got Simon the Zealot. Now, this is the zealot is actually two words. One is probably the Hebrew word for zealot that's translated in the King James Version as the Canaanite. That meant the zealous one. It probably was not referring to being from Canaan. But people argue about what the zealot meant. The Zealot was a political party that they were like the radicals who started the fight with Rome that ended up getting Jerusalem destroyed, was the Zealot. So it's possible that Simon is the Zealot, which is like the extreme opposite of the tax collector. You've got Matthew, who took a job working for the Roman government, and you've got Simon, who was actively like a member of a subversive political party who's out demonstrating against the government and, I don't know, doing terrorist acts eventually against the government. Like, those are the extremes. You've got an IRS agent and a terrorist both in one set of disciples here. But it's also possible that the zealot just meant the zealous one. He was, man, whatever that guy does, he's just all in. And maybe that's what his name meant. Then we've got Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. And again, Iscariot means from Kirioth. And of all the disciples, he's the only one we know for sure came from a Judean town. Sounds like all the other ones that we know where they came from Galilee, but he's a Judean. Now, the other interesting thing about Judah is that we want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt whose name is Judas. So the book of the Bible called Jude, who's Jesus' brother, we call it Jude. And the tribe of Israel that he came from is Judah. But in the Greek New Testament, Judah, Judas, and Jude are all the same word. There's not three names. Judah is Jude is Judas. And so what we have is the end of the list with Judah from Judah, who is the one who's going to betray him. It's already hinting that the Jews are the ones, Jesus' own people are the ones who are not catching on that he's the Messiah. And that's already been hinted at in the story. The last person's name, who I didn't tell you is actually an Old Testament name, James, is actually Jacobo in Greek. It's Jacob. So we've got another Israelite name on that list. Okay, so we've got this hodgepodge of guys. Some of them are tax collectors. One of them is a zealot. Lots of them are fishermen. We know who their family are, some of them we don't. They're from Galilee. We've got this ragtag group who are both disciples, learners from Jesus, and he's now authorizing them to officially represent him. He's a king sending these guys as his ambassadors. And that shows both his authority and his grace. He picked 12 of them. There's 12 tribes of Israel. Jesus is claiming to be the king who is appointing like a cabinet of 12 members. That's a sign of his authority here. And later on, he's going to say that he picked them to rule over the 12 tribes of Israel. But his grace is there too. Do you see the words that Jesus did? Jesus is the one who called them. He's the one who chose them. And he's the one who designated them as apostles. Designated means named. He's the one who's giving this role to them. He chose, he's the one who did it, and these are the guys he chose. Okay, So here in Luke 6, we can see that Jesus is using his authority to give grace to his disciples, and then to take his disciples and turn them into ambassadors to give his grace to others through them. And we're already seeing Jesus' titles and him acting in his titles here. Jesus is the Christ, the anointed one, like David was. He defended his disciples' eating not because that's not breaking the Sabbath, but because I'm the Christ, I'm the anointed one, I'm the one in David's position, and I can feed my people any way I want to. He says he's the son of David. He also says he's the son of man, the one in Daniel who's the ultimate judge, the one who's rightly worshiped. He's the Lord of the Sabbath, the one that the Sabbath is named for. And then he uses his grace to feed his disciples. He wouldn't feed himself, but he feeds his disciples. He used it to heal a sick person and to deal with the conflict. I don't know about you, but if everybody was looking at me, I wouldn't want to stand up and have to have that conflict right in the middle of a church service. Jesus did that for that man. And then he shows his grace by choosing these 12 ordinary guys that he sends as his representatives to take this grace to others. And so Jesus, as the Son of Man, has authority not only to heal, but to save life. That's the point that Luke is getting to. Jesus' ability to heal. Remember in the previous story where he said, I'm the Son of Man, and I want to show you by healing this man who can't walk that I have authority to forgive his sin. And likewise, this man who stretched out his hand, he said, which should I do? Which should everyone do? Save life or destroy it? And Jesus said he's come to save life. And then he sent us. He sent me. And he sent you. And you can tell this message to anyone, but I'm doing it because Jesus has sent me. Okay? I want to tell you that Jesus is for you. Jesus is God's Son, and he's God. He's the Son of Man, the Son of God. He came and he died and he rose again. That hasn't happened in the story yet, but he did that in order to save you. And in Jesus, all your sin is forgiven because he's the judge who has the right to forgive your sin. And we're hearing over and over that he has the right to do that. And we're hearing that I and you have the right to give this forgiveness out to everyone we come in contact with.